Hello and welcome. Today is Sunday, April the 19th, 2020, and this is another episode of Did You See That? And this is going to be in reference to a portion of the passage from 1 Samuel 28 through chapter 31 and Psalm 18. And today we'll be looking at an event that happened in chapter 28 where Saul consults a medium to see what his fate will be in an altercation with the Philistines. And this is probably one of the more difficult portions of Scripture because of the events that occurred and how they occurred and the things that occurred within them. And so as we look at different commentaries on this particular section, no matter how respected the commentator may be, you're going to see the gamut of opinions on this as to what occurred and actually occurred and how it occurred and the ramifications of why it occurred. And we're not going to go into all those nuances. You can do that on your own. But just to say that commentators have talked about the state of the intermediate state of the body once one has died before the resurrection of the dead. There's commentating about that. There's commentating about Samuel appearing from the dead, and could he or could he not? There's opinion about whether it was a demon that appeared in the guise of Samuel, which they would argue that even Satan can disguise himself as an angel of light. So it was Satan or one of his minions that was there. So you will see the gamut of these. And I'm going to give you again my particular take on this, with the understanding that every time I come to this section, I am always ending up consulting other commentaries to see what they have to say. So let's first of all start with what we can agree on, because it's there are imperative statements in the scriptures that God has made in his laws. And when I say they're imperative, there's no ambiguity. It's this way and there's no other way about it. And one of these imperative statements is found in Deuteronomy chapter 18, verse 10, starting there. Or there shall not be found among you anyone who makes his son or his daughter pass through the fire, or one who takes divination, or one who practices witchcraft, or one who interprets omens, or a sorcerer. And in verse 11, or one who casts a spell, or a medium, or a spiritist, or one who calls up the dead. And this is verse 12, for whoever does these things is detestable to the Lord, and because of these detestable things, the Lord your God will drive them out before you. That means driving them out of the land. This is, again, Moses preparing the people to go into the land of Israel. And he's driving out those nations that are there because they practice these things. And it says, and these things will not be found among you. So that's one thing that we can certainly agree on, is that God has said that it's wrong, and it will not be tolerated, and it's detestable in his sight. And that does not change. God does not change, and those statutes do not change. So that's one thing we can agree on. I think another thing that we can agree on is that this witch of Endor does not have the power to raise the dead. All right, it says that she was one who had that dealt with familiar spirits. In other words, she dealt with some demonic power that she was familiar with. Now, the word for familiar spirit is actually the Hebrew word ab, and it's it's the god from the bottle. It's basically how it comes out. But basically, she was probably a ventriloquist. It's a weird form of divination where they could throw their voice to make it come out from their stomach area or from their armpit area. It's, in fact, literally, it can be interpreted as one who speaks from the arms, or from the where the armpits are, what it really is signifying there. So the one thing that we can agree on is that she does not have the power to raise the dead. In fact, her reaction when her familiar spirit doesn't appear that she's used to, but that it says in verse 12 of chapter 28 there, 1 Samuel, when the woman saw Samuel, she cried out with a loud voice, and the woman spoke to Saul, saying, "Why have you deceived me? For you are Saul." She was surprised that something that normally doesn't happen happened, that she saw Samuel, and it startled her. And that very reaction of startledness there indicates that she didn't do it, okay? This is a work of God. So I think we can agree on that. Now, as I said, there's a lot of back and forth. Some saying this was not Samuel at all, but he was a demon in the guise of Saul. We even see where the scripture tells us that Satan himself can disguise himself as an angel of light, for instance. And so that it was a deceptive spirit that was there, and how that spirit came about, the knowledge that it did about the fate of Saul, we can again only speculate. If we're speculating about the demonic spirit, we have to speculate about how that demonic spirit received its information. And I mean, it's possible because I mean, even we see in one of the discourses of when we see where God is dealing with the kings of Israel, and it says as the sons of God, that means the angels were appearing before him, and even the demonic angels were in proximity. He said, "Who will go and be a lying spirit within?" And then he named the prophets that he was going to send that lying spirit in. That's not unheard of, okay? But that is, you really have to infer a lot of information to come to that conclusion when the scripture says that Samuel said. I mean, it says then in verse 15, then Samuel said to Saul. It doesn't say something like, and then the deceiving spirit said to Saul, or that transformed demon said to Saul. It just says, and then Samuel said to Saul. So it's very difficult for us to, or for me anyway, to come to the conclusion of anything except that this was Samuel that had come back, that God had brought Samuel back. And I would use another example from Scripture to support that. At the Transfiguration, Peter, James, and John saw and heard Moses and Elijah talking with Jesus. They had to be brought back to do that. So and God has the power and to do what He wills in the manner in which He wills. And in that situation where Jesus was on the mount and Moses and Elijah appeared, they were there in apparently a bodily form, not their resurrected bodies, but in the appearance of a body, whether it was through appearance sake, or if in the intermediate state, God assigns to us a spiritual body until we receive that glorified body, I do not know. And again, we can only speculate there. So I am of the opinion that, again, indeed, Samuel did appear before Saul, and it's by the power of God, not by the power of the witch of Endor. And I can say that because of 1 Chronicles 10, I think it's 13. So in 1 Chronicles 10, verse 13, it says this, so Saul died for his trespass, which he committed against the Lord, because of the word of the Lord, which he did not keep, and also because he asked counsel of a medium, making inquiry of it, and did not inquire of the Lord. Therefore he killed him and turned the kingdom to David, the son of Jesse. And that's 1 Chronicles 10, verses 13 and 14. So from there, I can say it was not the power of the medium that brought forth Samuel. God did that, but he did punish Saul as part of his judgment for doing the very thing he was not supposed to do. Now, an odd thing is when you become to this first part of the section,
is that it talks about how Saul had excommunicated all the mediums and the sorcerers and such, and cast them out of his kingdom. And if he did that of his own volition, then certainly that's a commendable thing. Even though he's not a commendable king, he did a commendable thing. That'd be praiseworthy. It does lend to the question, though, when did he do it, and for what reason did he do it? At the behest of Samuel before he died? Did Samuel strongly persuade the king to do this thing because Samuel was a holy man? He exhibited holy attributes towards the people. In other words, his goal was to bring the people into obedience to the precepts of God. So did Samuel convince Saul to do that thing, or did Saul do it in order to look pious and look like he was a godly man, even though we know that his heart was not there? I do not know. Or did he do it of a conviction that he should do it because it was wrong? But we know that he did have cast out all these mediums. But then when he did go to the inquire of the Lord regarding the attack of the Philistines, the Lord did not answer him. And instead of patiently waiting upon the Lord, which he didn't do at the first of his kingship. Remember, this is a sin he committed way back at the very beginning of his kingship, when he was going to go out and fight, and he was going to make a sacrifice, and he was supposed to wait 7 days for Samuel to come. And when Samuel did not come exactly when Saul thought he should come, then he did the sacrifice himself. He took it upon himself to do the Levitical sacrifice. And as he was doing so, Samuel arrives, and of course he is rebuked from that. And at that point, Samuel even tells him that the kingdom will be ripped out from him and given to another. So here again, he did not wait for the Lord. He, again, took it upon himself to go find a medium then. If God's not going to talk to me, then I'm going to go to somebody who will, basically, even if it's a wickedness that will talk to him. So we see here that that he does do exactly that. He breaks even the own precepts that he put forth, he breaks them and seeks out a medium. Now, one final thing that I would bring out is about the woman's reaction. Again, we know she screamed out when she saw Samuel. It was a startling thing. She did not expect it. And so King Saul said to her, do not be afraid, but what do you see? Now, this is verse 13 of chapter 28. And the woman said to Saul, now listen to this. And depending on your translation, it's going to be read a little bit differently. But in the New American Standard, it says, I see a divine being coming up out of the earth. The first thing she says is, I see a divine being coming up out of the earth. And then verse 14, and he said to her, what is its form? And she said, an old man is coming up, and he is wrapped with a robe. And Saul knew that it was Samuel at that point, and he bowed with his face. I think there's two distinctions here that's being made here. The first one is, I see a divine being, or she says, I see God's coming up. Or in the Syriac translation of this, it says, and I see the angel of the Lord coming up. But the word under this here is Elohim. And that's a word that you should be familiar with, because we've talked about it before even. Typically, it is used to describe the divine or the supreme being, God, the creator, the omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent God who has made all things, who is sovereign over all things. That's typically how it's used. But there is other instances in the Old Testament where Elohim is used to talk about human judges that are put over the people, as well as angels. So it's used in various ways. But here and even when it says the angel of the Lord, it uses this as well. But I think it's interesting here that instead of seeing the demon that she was normally used to seeing in whatever form that was, and it's not, I mean, the horns and the pitchfork, that's a medieval representation of Satan. But whatever form she was used to seeing, this was not what was coming up. It was a divine being. It was evident from the appearance of it that it was unique in that respect. And then she says at that also point, she saw the old man coming up that was dressed in a mantle or a cloak. And at Jesus' transfiguration, Moses and Elijah were not alone, but we saw the transfigured Christ, him in his glory that was exuding the glory of God in a manifestation of bright light. And that it was so bright, so white. In the book of Luke, it says it was whiter than any fuller's soap. In other words, it was the brightest, whitest thing that anyone could ever look upon. And I'm wondering if in this case here, we aren't seeing a divine being of that type of, in other words, manifesting the glory of God. So it's God doing this, and then Samuel also appearing and then having discourse with Saul. So this is a difficult portion. I'm not going to lie. And I every time I come to it, I end up reading tons of commentaries about it every single time. Again, trying to cement in my mind what I would take away from this. And some things we just have to say are in their presentation are so mysterious that we may not become to that definitive answer in this life, but it remains for us to be brought to illumination of it in the life that is to come. That's where Deuteronomy 29:29 comes out. It says, the secret things belong to the Lord, but the things that he has revealed belong to us and to our children. And so let us remember that there are some things that are revealed here and some things that are not revealed here. And we need to be cautious how dogmatic we are about those things that are not revealed here, that we don't fall into error because of that. So we'll not waste any more of your time on this. It's something that, again, we would ask that you wrestle with. But I do thank you again for your attention, and I hope to see you again on Did You See That?